surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. 'Cause I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh yes I am. I am a child of God. Oh, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Cause I am surrounded by the arms of the Father, and I am surrounded by songs of deliverance. 'Cause we've been liberated
us, what He has purchased for us, God. Lord, transform us this morning, God. Show us your glory. Show us. And I see the cloud, and I step in. And I want to see your glory like Moses did. Flashes of lightning and rolls of thunder. Sing, I'm not afraid. And I'm not afraid. Oh, we're not afraid. No, I'm not afraid. Oh, show me your glory. Show me your glory, God. Show me your glory. Oh, right here, right now. Show me your glory. Yes, I'm awed by your beauty. You're lost in your eyes. And I wanna walk in your presence like Jesus did. Your glory surrounds me, and I'm overwhelmed. Oh, but I'm not afraid, and I'm not afraid. Oh, I'm not afraid. No, I'm not afraid. Oh, show me. So show me your glory. Show me your glory, my Lord. Show me your glory. Oh, we long to see your face. Show me your glory. Yes, and I long to look on the face of the one that I love. Long to stay in your presence. It's where I belong. Long to look on the face of the one that I love. Long to stay in your presence. It's where I belong. Oh, it's where I belong. This was why I was made. Oh, to see your face. Oh, it's where I belong. Yeah. Oh, it's where we belong. It's where we belong. Holy Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, move. Sing, I see the cloud. And I see the cloud. And I stay. Oh, I see the cloud. And I see the cloud. Yes. And I'm running. Oh, I see the cloud. And I see the cloud. Yes.
so good. I said this last time, but I was sitting there again. They're so good. Like every time Jason, Jamie, whoever's singing, I'm like, I feel like I'm in heaven. Like when she sings, show me, I'm like, duh. So good. Yeah, that's why Jason still doesn't let me on the worship team, but it's fine. We're working it out. Anyways, my name is Riche Christie. I am our high school and young adult pastor, if you don't know who I am. There's probably a ton of new people since the last time I've spoken, so I want to introduce myself a little bit. So my wife and I just got to celebrate our 5-year anniversary this Friday, so that was super exciting. We went and celebrated in the great town of Gatlinburg. Yeah, that was my first Gatlinburg experience, and let me tell you, it was an experience. It was great. I loved it. It was super fun. Lost and pup-up, but it's all good. But here's a few pictures because we have some even more fun news is we're expecting our first little one this November. So look at that. Hand up. That was the ultrasound a few weeks ago. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Man, already praising, getting the hands up. I'm excited. Hey, we don't know what the gender's going to be. So we'll take free prophetic words and any other thing you want to tell about our kid. Yeah, we're excited. I am so excited to be a dad. And man, I'm excited to be with you guys this morning too. It's going to be good. So let's jump in. If you weren't here last week, Derek kicked off a brand new series where we've been walking through different stories of the Old Testament. Kind of maybe not the big ones, maybe some of the more obscure ones to get some truth out, some life out, what God might be saying even in them today. So today we're going to be in a story in 2 Samuel 9, talking about a guy named Mephibosheth. Say that, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. It's okay. You'll get it at some point. We'll say it a lot today. You ever read the Bible and you're like, I have no idea what that says, but I'm just going to keep reading, right? So we're going to do a lot of that today. Some great names we're going to go over. But to get us kind of thinking in that thread, I want to ask you a question. How many of you guys have ever known what you should do, but when it came time to do the thing that you should do, you either just failed at it or just straight up didn't do it? Anybody? Right? Yeah. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just watch Tennessee football this fall. You'll figure it out. Just kidding. I believe it. It's Pruitt's here, baby. But like that kind of concept, that idea, if you're a parent in a room, you probably know what that's like, right? Kids doing what they shouldn't be doing, even though they know they shouldn't be doing it, right? And actually, being a youth pastor, just about every week, you get to run into that too. Especially, man, when you go on like a camp or retreat or stuff like that, it's like every camp and retreat we're leaving next weekend with our middle school and high school, something ridiculous happens every time. And I remember one of my first years, I was at leading a summer camp, and one of the first things you do when you get to summer camp is you drop all your luggage off, and then you kind of go through like the rules of the week, right? Where we tell the kids like, hey, like, hopefully you didn't bring your knives and don't kill anybody, okay? Like, you know, girls are pink, boys are blue, no purple, no one's finding their husband or wife this week, okay? Stay out of each other's cabins, that stuff, right? And so you go through the rules, and so I remember this one year, we get through the rules, and the first day goes great, but it's night one, and me and my buddy Justin are on like patrol duty, right? Where we're gonna find you. If you're trying to find your wife, we're gonna break your finger. Just kidding. But so we're driving around, and we roll around the corner into this one building, and I see on the side of the building, I'm like, what is that? And there's at least like 15 to 20 feet of like bed sheet tied together and like 4 boys rappelling out of the window. And I look even closer and I'm like, oh my gosh, those are my guys. Those are my small group guys. I'm like, Clark, Jordan, what are you doing? And they're all like, and I'm like, get off there. And they're like, should we go down or should we get back up in the window? Like, get up. And so they climb back through the window. And it was one of those moments too, parents, I'm sure you know this, where it's like, I have to like scold you and yell at you, but that was awesome. Like, that was really impressive, right? And so we get there, we're in like the hallway thing, and we're like, you guys can't do that. It's night one. Like, come on. And they're like, we're so sorry. And then there's this like lull, and like perfectly timed, Clark looks at us and he goes, well, like, technically you guys didn't say we couldn't climb out the window. Like, it wasn't in the rules, but use your brain, right? Like, just stuff like that all the time, right? We do that stuff all the time where we know what we should be doing, but then we don't do it anyways, right? And man, I don't know about you, but when it comes to my faith, my walk with Jesus, there's times where, man, I know the right answer, right? Like, I could quote the Bible verse. I know what I should be doing or should think like. But when it came down to crunch time or to a moment where it mattered, man, sometimes I struggled to follow Jesus, or know what I should be doing. Or sometimes I struggled with believing how he saw me and walking in that. In fact, I would even say there's been times in my walk with Jesus where, man, I had all the best intentions to grow, and it felt like everything was against me to grow. And if you've been at Christ Fellowship for any period of time at all, you know that one of our biggest hearts is to equip individuals to be all God designed them to be. And one of the ways that we do that is, man, we want to equip people to understand that you get to hear God's voice as a child of the King. You get to hear his voice, and you get to know your identity, know what he thinks about you, and walk in that, right? It's a huge heart of ours. But if you're anything like me too, like there's times where it's like, man, I know I get to hear his voice, but I'm pressing in and it feels like silence. Like I know what should be happening, it's not happening. Or I know that the scriptures say I'm a son or daughter of the King, but man, I'm sitting here and I'm feeling like the complete opposite. Feeling like anything but that. Man, maybe you've sat here on a weekend or at an encounter night or some experience with God where he's like grabbed a hold of your heart in life and he set you on fire and you felt passionate and excited to grow with him, and you left and you're like, this is it, I'm going to grow, I'm going to walk with Jesus, I'm going to walk with him faithfully, and then Monday morning feels a little bit different than Sunday morning, right? And heading into work with a boss who tells you how bad you are at your job is a little less motivating than Derek preaching the kingdom expanding in the workplace, and you slowly find yourself drifting away from the truth and into the lies again and again and again, right? That battle, that drifting, I think we all do it. I know it's been a part of my story, and even when Derek laid out kind of the teaching idea of this series, I knew this is what I wanted to speak on, because I feel like this kind of drifting, this battle has really became like the story that Jesus is always preaching at me every season, to learn to walk in this in greater and greater truth, to own the truth in the transformation that he's given me and leave the old ways and the old lies behind. But if I'm also honest, I'm going to be teaching today from a place of, yeah, I've experienced this at other places, but I feel like I'm having to re-experience and learn this again. That as long as I've walked with Jesus, this is not something like I've been able to move away from in any season. Anything I've learned, it's always anchored back to this idea of sitting myself with him and receiving the truth and letting it transform me. I remember the first time I even heard this concept of really leaving that behind and anchoring yourself in truth. Like, I heard it from a guy named Chad Norris in Greenville, South Carolina, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I feel like every season the Lord teaches me a different thing about it. So no matter how long you've been walking with Jesus, whether it's 60 years or 6 minutes, this idea of drifting, going back and forth is a struggle for all of us. And he's always inviting us in to be liberated from it, I think. And so today I want to talk about that. I want to dive into this concept, this idea, so that we would realize that transformation, that us shaping into everything that God's designed us to be, called us to be, man, it doesn't just happen in a moment or an experience. It happens in many of those combined over time. It just doesn't happen overnight. But I think through the story of David and Mephibosheth, I think we're going to see that it really happens by staying with the king, staying seated at the table with the king. So here's what we're going to talk about today, is that at the end of the day, you are shaped where you're seated. Where you plant your life, where you receive the truth, you're going to be shaped by that. And so it matters where you plant your life, plant your thoughts, plant your heart, plant your soul. And so we're going to dive into that, like I said, in 2 Samuel 9. In this story with David and Mephibosheth. So to give you kind of some background on this, you've got King David, and one of his best friends was a guy named Jonathan. And when they were together, they basically made an agreement, and they were like, hey, if I die, you're taking care of my family. And they were both like, great, deal. And so we pick up this story, and David's trying to figure out, because Jonathan has now died, am I keeping up my end of the bargain? Have I taken care of all of Jonathan's kids? And he finds out that there's this one named Mephibosheth. Say that again. Kind of getting better. We'll figure it out by the end of this. Mephibosheth is not with him. And so there's this story that we read. And starting in verse 3, it says, and the King David said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I may show kindness of God to him? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan, and he is crippled in his feet. So he's trying to figure out, am I taking care of him? And the king said, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he's in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. Say that, Lo-debar. You ever read the Bible and you're like, oh, this is already really hard to read. Like, why are you doing this, right? Like over and over, right? So we've got this going on at Lo-debar, and he calls Mephibosheth to come. Verse 6, it says, and Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage to him and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? He gets invited to this table and he doesn't even know how to handle it. And David's just pumped that he's there. And it says, and then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and all to his house I have given to your master's grandson. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, he shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Mica, and all that lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both his feet. Right, so we got this story. It's kind of random, obscure story, just a quick snippet, right, in the story of King David. But we got this guy named Mephibosheth. And I think there's a few things in here that we learn that are absolutely vital for us understanding our identity, to walking with God, and to really learning, like, why do we drift? Why do we go back and forth between those lies and truth? And so to kind of get us thinking in that thread, I'm going to invite a few of my grounded high dudes out. They're bringing some props for me because I want to explain this between these two locations. You got Lo-debar and the King's Table. So these guys are going to bring out what I would describe as Lo-debar and the King's Table. And so you got to understand with Lo-debar, which is right here. Give it up for Creed. Yeah, Creed. Creed's got Lo-debar here. He doesn't live there though. Lo-debar looks like to me right now a Amazon Prime box that I literally took out of the recycling bin as I got in the car this morning, and a styrofoam plate and a plastic fork, right? Just kind of like blah, like not good. No one wants to eat off cardboard. No one, like just not a good situation, right? So we got Lo-debar over there, but then over here we got the King's Table, right? Fine china, look at that. Not from my house, but thank you, Trish Short. Right? Some gold forks. Never had a gold fork, but we got one here, right? Some just nice table set, beautiful setting at the King's Table, right? So we got the King's Table and Lo-debar, right? And really in the story, we have this defining moment. This is kind of the first thing I want to talk about, is where Mephibosheth, man, it's the moment where he gets called out of Lo-debar into the King's Table, right? And look what it says. He gets called there. In verse 7, it says, and David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness at the King's Table, you and your father, for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage to him and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Right? He's invited to this table. He said, man, you get to eat at my table always. Right, which was not like flippant words by King David. He wasn't just like trying to cheer Mephibosheth up because he felt bad about himself. And he was speaking truth to him, and the truth was the fact that when you got called to the king's table, it meant you were in the king's inner circle, which meant everything the king had, you had, that you get everything, that you were taken care of to the day you die with the highest protection, the most lavish lifestyle. You were untouchable. And so Mephibosheth gets invited to this table despite how Mephibosheth feels about himself, right? And I love this illustration, this picture, because like this is our story, right? Like you and I once lived in the land of Lo-debar, right? For Mephibosheth, this was the land of desolation, of barrenness. Man, for us, it's the land of hopelessness, of purposelessness, of running after other things, of trying to find hope in other things. The land of fear, guilt, shame, whatever like weighty, negative sin thing, this is the land of that. And at some point, Jesus comes along in our story and he goes, I'm taking you out of Lo-debar and I'm planting you at the king's table, and we get a seat at the table to receive from the Father and be in his presence. Right? The beauty of that. The beauty of that despite what we think or feel or how things we believe should add up, we've got a seat at the table. And this is what happens. He gets called to the king's table. And what's this king's table represent for Mephibosheth? I mean, it represented the protection, the promises, a promise fulfilled from his father Jonathan. But man, this is the table of identity. This is the table of receiving truth, the table that I get to be one of God's children, hear his voice, the table where fear, guilt, shame, self-protection, promotion leave. I get to just be freely me at the table, and I'm invited to sit down and take a seat. And man, we learn to sit at the king's table and become a king's kid. And slowly but surely we learn that we are shaped where we're seated. And as I'm seated at the table, I'm shaped by the king at the table. Right? I mean, this is the story of the gospel. This is the invitation to every human being that's ever lived. To leave the old life behind and learn to live at the king's table. And that's how it goes, right? Well, at least in theory, that's how it should go. Maybe for a little bit, but I don't know about you. As much as I've left Lo-debar behind, it still feels like it's a struggle to leave it completely behind. And did you notice what Mephibosheth said to David? His response to the invitation was not overjoyed, yes, I've been waiting. He goes, I'm such a dead dog. Like, why are you inviting me here? What are you doing? Do you know who I am? Like, what's going on here? And I think it reveals something super interesting. So don't miss this. I think it reveals something super interesting about Mephibosheth and us, is that even though Mephibosheth is called to the king's table, he doesn't think he belongs at the table. That even though he's got a seat at the table, he doesn't know how to sit down. That he has no idea how to exist here, how to be in this, that he's called to this place of truth, of love, of hope, of grace. But he has no idea how to act or how to live because, man, he's just like us. Because even though he left Lo-debar behind, now he's got a seat at the king's table. Man, we are way more comfortable living in Lo-debar than we are at the king's table. Because I've lived life at Lo-debar. I know what it's like to live here. I know what it's like to live in my managing dysfunction. I know what it's like to live in chaos of family. I know what it's like to live in addiction. I know what it's like to live in hopelessness. I know what it's like to live in this cycle of chaos. Like I've learned to live here. I'm good here. And then one moment Jesus calls us and it's like, hey, come sit at the table. And you're like, I don't know how to be here. This is uncomfortable. What do you mean that I'm allowed to sit here? Like, do you know what I've done? Do you know what's going on in my life? Right? Like this is the struggle to sit here. It's the radical grace of the gospel that literally in the lowest moment of your life, think about that, the thing that no one else in this room you want to know, the greatest shame that you carry, the biggest regret that you've done, Jesus looks at it and goes, come sit down. You've got a seat. Come sit here. And you're like, what? No. I don't know. I don't know how to live here. I'm such a dead dog. And this is that battle, right? In between Lo-debar and the king's table. Because let's just be honest, it's easier to live over here because we know it than to learn how to live new. It's easier to continue gossiping because that's all I've ever done than learn how to be a voice of truth. Right? It's easier to continually let pornography destroy my life and be in this cycle because it's all I've ever done than to invite other people into my issues to help me heal. right? It's easier to constantly get angry and let my anger overtake me than to understand that I can be filled by the Spirit and release my anger and walk in newness of life. That seems too hard. I've lived over in the anger way too long, right? It's easier to be insecure and feel like everyone's against you than to understand that Jesus is for you, right? It's easier to look for love everywhere else than to try to wrap your head around this idea that Jesus loves me just as I am. And we might do it for a moment, right? We might do it for a meal. We might sit here for a little bit. But then we just constantly drift back over here because it's easier to process our hurt, our pain, our life in Lo-debar than it is to process our life at the King's table in the King's presence and get the King's perspective. That's too much work. It's too hard. I don't know how to do it, right? And so we go back and forth because that's the battle. And so you want to know why you're drifting so much? It's not because you're not reading your Bible enough. It's not because you're not praying enough or you're not holy enough or there's better Christians than you. It's not because you're not nice enough. It's because you have a seat at the King's table and you don't believe you belong there. And so you haven't learned to stay seated in his presence with the King. And so you just let yourself drift over here because it's more comfortable. And so we get all upset like, man, I wish God would move in my life. He is moving. He has moved. And he's invited you to sit down, take a seat at the table. And at some point, we've got to come to grips with the fact that we do get shaped in our walk with God where we're seated. And we've got enough unbelieving believers where people are living in the, thank you, Jesus, you punched my ticket to heaven, I have salvation, but I'm definitely not experiencing heaven on earth, and somehow I managed to say that that's okay to live in. But he's inviting you to experience the fullness. And if I'm shaped where I'm seated, if I spend too much time in Lo-debar, I'm going to develop a life filled with just the things of Lo-debar. But if I learn to slowly but surely plant myself at the King's table, I will be shaped by the King at this table. And man, we've got to, at some point, realize and wake up, there is a seat waiting for me. It's waiting for me, and I've got to draw a line in the sand that says, like, I'm not going back here. I'm not going back here anymore. Not just for the sake of me and my walk with God, but for the sake of my wife, for the sake of my family. Like, I can't keep going back here because Jesus has bought me and there's a newness of life that I get to walk in. This is the place where family legacy has changed. Man, we're preparing to have a family right now and I'm sitting here, I'm done with that. Like, I've spent enough time over here that I'm over this freaking Lo-debar stuff. I need to plant myself at the table because I want my kids to know that their dad has spent time with the King. And he's a dad that knows the King, and he's going to show them the King through how he loves them. And there are so many people that know Jesus that haven't met the King at the table. Man, you have a seat waiting for you. A seat is sitting here. And the seat isn't just sitting when everything's going good, when everything's nice. Because whose table in the story is this? It's King David's, it's his table, right? One of my favorite Psalms, Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. For you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. In the presence of what? In the presence of my enemies. In the worst part of your life, the lowest part of your life, in the best part of your life when everything's going good, the table's always there. It's always got a seat. So at some point, I've got to have a perspective when I walk through the valley that I'm not just heading back to Lo-debar where everything is horrible and everything's against me, but no, I'm walking through this new valley with a new perspective from the King that he's with me and he won't leave me and he's walking me through this because your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And this is where truth and transformation in life happens. This is where we're shaped by the fullness of the Father. And man, I think so many of us are living a life robbed of the beauty, of the fullness that the cross represented and the indwelling of the Spirit in us because we just haven't realized we already got a seat. You want to know the best part about this story? The last line in it says, and he was still crippled in both his feet. He was still crippled in both his feet, but he learned to sit down in the middle of his brokenness, in the middle of his mess, whatever that was for Mephibosheth, whatever that is for you. It wasn't that it just magically all got cleaned up and everything's great now. No. That in my highest of highs and the lowest of lows, I got a seat at the table. And the thing I love about myself the most, the thing I hate about myself the most, I still got a seat at the table. That you don't get to choose if you got a seat. You already got an invitation. Just sit down. Man, sit down and sit at the table. Sit at the table. And I'm telling you, like, this is the battle I feel like I've been fighting. And I don't know if it's just because, like, man, there's so much going on. I realize, like, today marks 1 year of our first time ever visiting the Tri-Cities, right? And now we're preparing for a family, and I felt like the Lord was like, I want you to prepare spiritually, emotionally, physically, like, for this new season that I have you in. And I feel like every step forward I'm taking, I'm getting dragged back to Lo-debar. Like, I'm experiencing this right now. Again, that what matters most is sitting myself at the table with the Lord. We get caught up in so many other things. But how do I practically do this? How do I walk this out in like a daily life? Man, I would say two things. You need people and you need a place. That in order for the table to take like fruition in your life, you need people in your life who are already sitting there. You need people in your life who know what it's like to sit at the table with a king. Because if you have people in your life that are just always sitting in Lo-debar, you're going to learn to sit in Lo-debar. But if you got people in your life that understand what it's like to sit at the king's table, when you start to drift, they're going to drag you back. Say, sit down, eat. That's what David was to Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was like, I don't belong here. And he's like, sit your butt down, all right? You belong here. This is where you're at. And man, even this week, I was sitting in the office and Laura Whitney and I are talking about the year, and just to be honest, one of the big things I felt through the year is like I failed a lot. Not based out of anyone else, just what I was sensing in myself. And she just starts rattling off truth to me, reminding me of what's true. And I was sitting there, and I usually like always just like, I know, but I just received it and like was on the verge of tears in the middle of this meeting. And then a few hours later, Gina Hawkins, my boss, walks in, and she's like, you doing all right? And so I tell her like, I don't know. And she starts to like rattle off how great I'm doing. And I'm not going to lie, like when you're sitting there and you're feeling bad about yourself, it's really nice for your boss to be like, you're amazing. I was like, thanks. I needed to hear that. But I was sitting there because I got people that are sitting me at the table saying, sit down, this is where you belong, stop going back there. Right? And I would even say, man, spouses, like we need to be this for each other. We've got so many other people in our life dragging us to Lo-debar. The last person it should be is our husband or wife. Man, we should be truth tellers to each other. Because one of the primary ways I get the truth is from Jenna, reminding me of what's true, because she sees the darkest parts of my life and the messiest thoughts that I have. And she reminds me of the truth. One of my favorite things that we do in premarital counseling, Derek gave me this idea, is during one of the sessions we make, I guess kind of because we're leading it, but we have them sit across from each other and take some time and just ask the Lord, how do you see this person I'm about to marry? How do you see them? And then they get to share it with one another. And it's so beautiful. Like it really is so cool to see that truth just like come out of the person that you love the most. And every time they do that, I'm reminded like, man, why do we stop doing this after premarital counseling? Like we should be doing this all the time for each other. So do that this week. Sit down and ask the Lord how he sees your husband or wife or significant other. And tell him. Remind them of the truth. I'm telling you, husbands, you want some brownie points, you should do that. But the second thing is, man, we need a place. We need a place to plant ourselves. I think literally we need a place in our daily rhythm of life that is a literal king's table. For me, it's my kitchen table in the morning. I do my best. I fight my best through all the hating mornings and making coffee. I'm trying to plant myself here. And listen, not every morning is like, show me your glory. All right, it's like, show me more coffee half the time. But I'm trying to plant myself here to create a rhythm because there's so much going on in life. Man, we need space to just let the king break in and tell us what's true and tell us what's needed. And man, if you sat in church for any amount of time, you probably heard terms like devotional time, quiet time, read your Bible, whatever. Man, it can become resounding, but I'm telling you, I'm more and more convinced that is the key above maybe any other key, is that intimate daily connection with the Lord. I even think this, I don't think there's anything special about like heroes of the faith. Man, I love Derek to death, but I don't think like he's like any more special than anyone in this room. I just think the dude devoted his life to the intimacy with the Father. I mean, you guys know his story. He was in the workplace just like anybody else. Jesus grabs a hold of his life, just like he's grabbed a hold of all of our lives, and he said yes. Man, I look back at my life and I'm like, it is ridiculous that I'm a youth pastor. Man, I got trouble. My dad picked me up from the police station twice before I was 20, and now I'm leading your children. But I sit there and I go, there's no way any of this happens outside of Jesus saying, you got a seat, sit down. And I think there's some of you that, man, like Jesus has things lined up, ready to just domino effect. And you want change. Every time you're here, you're motivated. You're like, yes, I want to change. I want this to happen. If you want change in your life to take place, start changing things in your life, and they will take place. Start changing your lifestyle into being positioned at the table. Man, before a meeting, before dinner with your wife and kids, before whatever you got going on, ask Jesus the truth. Don't process in Lo-debar that everyone's against you, your life's never gonna get better. No, your life has the king in it, the Spirit's in it. Ask him what he wants you to know and walk in the truth of that. Because this is the place where life gets transformed, and I've seen it over and over and over again in my own life, over and over and over again in students' lives. And I love it. Man, I've had the privilege the past few summers to go and speak at a summer camp in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is like the stepchild of Michigan. No one ever talks about it. It's like the part to Canada, we don't like you, you're too cold, all right? But every summer I get to go up there because it's beautiful in the summer. Absolutely beautiful along the shore of Lake Superior. And gosh, this was probably 3-4 years ago. It's the first time I was up there, and I was doing a night on kind of this lie stuff, the lies and truth. And we kind of went after this idea of like, what's the greatest lie that you've believed? And so we walked through it, and worship starts, and you can see like a good chunk of the room connected clearly. And then after, people are mingling, and this kid comes running up to me, and he's looking at me, and he's like frustrated. Like you could tell visibly, like he was like angry. And it's almost through tears, and he's like, I'm so frustrated. Like, and I'm like, dude, what's going on? He's like, I know what lie I believe, and then you told me Jesus would be there in the moment where I started believing it, and I can't find him anywhere, and I'm just frustrated, I'm angry. And I was like, okay, calm down. Like, let's go over to the picnic table, let's sit down. And so we sit down at this picnic table, and I'm just gonna lead him through it individually. And I was like, well, tell me what the lie was. Like, what were you believing? And he said, I've always felt abandoned, and I feel it right now. Like, Jesus didn't show up again. I'm always abandoned. Like, no one ever takes care of me. I'm abandoned. So I was like, okay, well, what was the memory that popped up? And he proceeds to tell me the story that when he was 6 years old, he was adopted from an orphanage in Russia. The reason he was in that orphanage is because 2 years before that, when he was 4 years old, his parents got in a fight or something took place, and he was hiding in his room, but then he came across through the house, and he witnessed his dad shooting himself in his kitchen. And this was 4 years old. And so there was all just utter chaos in the family. And what ended up happening is the mom just totally lost herself because of it, and she ended up losing custody of the kids, and they end up in this Russian orphanage. So he gets adopted by this family, and he's grown up in America. But he's telling this story, and so we're sitting there, and I'm like, okay, Jesus, like, was this the first time he felt abandoned? And he felt like it was actually a year or so prior to that. It was like his 3rd or 4th birthday party that he's thinking of. And he remembers that his dad didn't show up because he was at work or he couldn't come. But that feeling of abandonment started there, that he wanted his dad to be there and he wasn't there. And so we were like, okay, Jesus, where were you? Like, you're in every situation of our life, even if we can't see it. Where were you? And he gets this picture of Jesus sitting across the table at the birthday party with the cake and the candles. And Jesus has a birthday cone hat on and like the noisemaker, and he's like, whoa, happy birthday, like I love you, like I'm with you. And the kid's like feeling so loved and taken care of. And so then I was like, well, let's see where he was in that moment with his dad a few years after that, where he lost him. And he gets this sense that Jesus just like wraps him and hugs him as he like turned away from the kitchen and the scene and ran away. Jesus just embraced him and hugged him, like bear hugged him, and was like, he said, I'm always with you. I will always be your father. I'll never leave you or forsake you. And he just held him. And so this kid's like bawling as we're praying, and like you could see the stuff just lift off him. And it was amazing. And so, yeah, the rest of the week went on, and I was just the guest speaker at this camp, so I didn't talk to the kid through the year. And so the next year I come back and he's there again. I was like, dude, how you doing? This is a year later. And he's like, I'm doing so good. I'm so excited that you're back. Like, man, he's like, I've never forgot what happened last year. Like, God's always with me, and I've sensed it so much this year. And he told me about his year and how great it was. But I was sitting there and realizing, like, this dude in a moment was transformed by the truth. Because instead of processing his deepest pain in Lo-debar, that everything's against him, everyone abandons him, nothing's gonna work out for him, he realized the truth that the Lord was at the table with him, and he's got a seat there. And it radically transformed this kid's life. I'm pretty sure he's on staff at this summer camp this year too, which is so wild to me. And you just saw the transformation. But that's the invitation for every single one of us, that we all get invited to this, that we don't have to live there anymore. We get to leave it behind.